This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guests in Washington, D.C., James Risen, author of State of War, The Secret History of the CIA and Bush Administration. His latest article this weekend in the New York Times, U.S. in Action Seen After Taliban POWs Died. And with us here in New York, Susanna Sirkin, Deputy Director of Physicians for Human Rights, which has been calling attention to this massacre of hundreds, perhaps 2,000 suspected Taliban prisoners for a number of years now. At the top of the show, we played President Obama speaking to Anderson Cooper on CNN and Sunday in Africa, saying he will call for an investigation. And yet I'm looking at a piece 2 days before by AP on Friday saying Obama administration said they had no grounds to investigate the 2001 deaths of Taliban prisoners of war who human rights groups allege were killed by U.S.-backed forces. This is 2 days later, and he's completely doing a 180-degree turn. What's happening here?
Well, the initial response that we saw came from a Pentagon spokesperson and essentially tracks what we've been hearing from the U.S. government since Physicians for Human Rights discovered this prison and its conditions, and then reported on the site and have repeatedly gone back to investigate and then calling for an international investigation. It's really welcome news to hear what the president said over the weekend, and I believe that really, this is the first time the president has had a chance with his advisors to look seriously at the history of this and what needs to be done now. So I would say that what we've just heard from the president is really what the position is, and it's enormously welcome news for Physicians for Human Rights and for many others who've been working on this case for almost 8 years.
Susanna Sirkin, when did you discover the mass grave?
We had a team with a physician and a human rights investigator that went to northern Afghanistan shortly after that surrender and the end of that initial and very serious conflict in the north in 2001 to look at possible human rights violations. And our investigators discovered the horrific conditions at the Shebregan prison, reported on them. There were prisoners there who were literally dying before their eyes of starvation, terrible unsanitary conditions, cold, they had almost no clothing, et cetera. It was appalling. And while they were there, they heard reports that there had been these enormous numbers of bodies dumped into a mass grave, and they actually saw surface remains and reported that to Physicians for Human Rights headquarters. Immediately, we worked with the United Nations to get a forensic team back there, and within a month, Physicians for Human Rights with the UN High Commission for Human Rights had investigators on the ground, and within the next few months we conducted an initial assessment and exposed 13 remains, autopsied 3, and reported that the manner of death of those 3 was homicide, and the cause of death was consistent with suffocation, which matched the eyewitness testimonies that had been reported in the area and that you saw in the Jamie Doran's film.
The massacre site was intact until 2006?
As far as we know, Physicians for Human Rights has repeatedly called for protection of that site. There has never been any kind of protection, even though President Karzai and others have promised that they would investigate the site and protect it. What we now know is, first of all, in 2008, one of our forensic scientists was able to go up to the area and notice that there were very large holes in the area. This was reported by McClatchy in December 2008. What we now know from satellite imagery that appears in James Risen's New York Times piece and that has been provided by the American Association for the Advancement of Science is that in 2006, there are photos with not much area destroyed, but maybe one large hole. And then a few months later, we see pictures of images that are very consistent with large earth-moving equipment. Within a month of that picture, we see a very large hole right at the area where what appears to be a backhoe and a dump truck on the site. So it looks as though actually within a month of Physicians for Human Rights filing a Freedom of Information Act request to get what the U.S. government knew, all branches knew about the Dasht-e-Leili massacre. The site has been dramatically damaged.
James Risen, can you talk about Del Spry, the FBI agent in Guantanamo, and what he learned?
Yeah, he was he had been it was a longtime FBI agent who had been assigned on a temporary basis to go to Guantanamo in 2002 on a couple short temporary duty rotations. He was, while he was there, he was the senior FBI representative on the island. And he told me that during those times that, you know, he kept getting the agents who worked for him were interrogating and questioning detainees, and that he kept getting this pattern of reports from the detainees all talking about surviving this massacre. And he said that they would volunteer this information to the FBI agents, and that so he felt he really didn't think at first, he didn't believe the stories because he thought that he'd been told that Al-Qaeda tried to you know, fabricate stories of torture and abuse as part of their training, and so he didn't believe it, although when he began to hear all of these, he thought it would be important for the U.S. to at least investigate the allegations so that they could be debunked, or else if they didn't try to investigate it, then this story would it would hang out there, and the U.S. would pay the price in its reputation eventually. What he said was that he wrote up what the FBI call 302 reports, which are, you know, reports of an interview with someone, and that he got word back from FBI headquarters to drop the issue, and he was told that it was not his mission at Guantanamo to investigate a massacre in Afghanistan, and instead he should be focused on his role as looking for, you know, evidence to be used in trials of detainees, and also for evidence, intelligence on possible future attacks against the U.S. What he told me was he understood it wasn't part of his mission, but thought that still it was something that should be looked into, and he was disappointed that the FBI didn't want to look into it. They told him that this was something for the Pentagon to look into, but as I said, it turns out that the Pentagon never really did look into it.
The significance of this, Susanna Sirkin, and what Physicians for Human Rights is calling for now?
Well, we're now calling for, first of all, protection of the site and protection of any witnesses in Afghanistan and elsewhere who may have information. And we're calling for, and I'm beginning to get a response to this request, a thorough, transparent investigation by the U.S. government into who was on the ground, who was there at the site, who was there at the time that the prisoners were loaded up, and who was there and knew something and watched and perhaps maybe had any engagement in the suffocation and killing by a gunshot of these apparently more than 1,000 prisoners who had surrendered, and what the U.S. Did in response to legitimate requests that they investigate everything to do with this massacre.
Also, the witnesses killed. Can you talk briefly about this that Jamie Doran documented? Talking to witnesses that were then killed, some of them tortured, for revealing this.
Yes, Physicians for Human Rights and the United Nations heard these reports and actually documented through other witnesses that several individuals were executed, disappeared, and tortured. People who knew about the incident or who were present. What is extremely disturbing is that we've now seen through the FOIA response that the U.S. government and apparently intelligence agency. It's a three-letter word that's redacted of an intelligence branch of the U.S. government in the FOIA. They knew and reported that eyewitnesses to this massacre had been killed and tortured. So there are clearly risks as we speak, and that's why Physicians for Human Rights is calling for an immediate protection and securing of the site, as well as protection of the witnesses by President Karzai and anyone else who is in a position to provide that protection.